The foyer, if you'd make your way into the auditorium, We're going to get started shortly. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We're about to get started. If you could make your way into the event space and take a seat.
You guys?
I'm Hank Gutman.
Hank
I'm
Gutman.
Chairman
Chairman of
of the Navy Yard.
the Navy Yard.
Chairman of the Navy Yard. Thrilled you're here.
Justin, you know probably.
Of course, I know you. Absolutely. Good to see you. Good to see you. So,
Great job here. It's really fantastic. Yes, I know.
with tenants like these guys, it's not hard, right?
Great.
That's the thing.
We were down in the US space like 3 or 4 years ago.
It's really
Yeah.
positioned.
I know. We thought we were a little crazy back then. Right?
No, I was excited. Yeah, crazy.
All right. You ready to go? Okay. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm Scott Cohen. I'm the co-founder of New Lab, and my partner David Belt and I are really honored to welcome you all here to this new series, Tacks, hosted by Justin Stanwix, who's the Yep, Justin's there. He's the Chief Revenue Officer of one of the most exciting companies here at New Lab, Nanotronics. And Nanotronics, they're bringing the world's most advanced microscope to every manufacturing sector. And really what they're doing is they're making it possible to manufacture at a nanoscale and having really an incredible impact on advances in material science. And I expect you'll learn more about that tonight. Justin actually is really much more than just the Chief Revenue Officer. He's someone who's really a thought leader here at New Lab, and he's got a really dynamic background and has worked in a range of disciplines, and he brings that approach to innovation and in the way he works with us here at New Lab. It's also a really incredible privilege to welcome Beth Comstock. She's Vice Chair of GE. We're thrilled to have her here. She leads business innovation at GE. And their efforts to accelerate new growth across a whole range of technologies is really changing the world we live in. She's built incredible, impactful bridges between innovative young companies and large corporations, and really with the role GE plays in giving those innovations access to the infrastructure and the scale to have impact in the world is really impressive. Nanotronics and GE are two companies thinking about the future in ways that we couldn't imagine. And tonight we're going to all be a fly on the wall for a conversation about business, the challenges, the lessons, and the accomplishments, and really what comes next. So thank you both.
Thank you. All right. Hi, everyone. Hey, Beth. Thank you so much again for coming.
I love coming here. You guys are so lucky to work here. It's fantastic.
It is, yeah, it's pretty. It's like a vacation from Manhattan every day.
Yeah.
So I was just reading this earlier this week about all the divisions. I mean, Vice Chair is a broad title as a CEO of Business Innovations, but it's lighting, current, which I will ask you to explain a little bit more about current, GE Ventures, licensing, GE Sales, marketing, and communications across the sixth highest market cap company in the world. Yeah, and again, I was reading this week, 123 billion in revenue, 262 billion market cap. I remember earlier this year when Facebook went past you guys for like a day, Matthew and I were like, how is that possible? The world is insane. You're also president of the board of the Cooper Hewitt and on the board of Nike, and probably your proudest role, an advisor to Nanotronics. So I want to start at the beginning. And you studied biology in undergraduate, and recently you actually wrote about how studying biology made you a good marketer. But when you were actually studying biology, what is it that you wanted to do? Where did you think you were going to go?
Well, I thought I was going to be a doctor and see how it turned out. So I wanted to be a doctor. And then along the way, what I really wanted to do was be a science reporter. And that was what propelled me to then go into an early career in media.
But also while you were studying, you worked at a factory one summer, right?
I did. I grew up in Winchester, Virginia, a great town in the Shenandoah Valley. And one summer I worked at the Rubbermaid factory. And it was one of those great experiences that in hindsight it was a great experience, but it was really good summer work. And I worked the shift from, I think it was 3 to midnight. And I made trash cans, and that was my specialty. And one time the team asked me, they took a bet that I couldn't handle those big mega trash cans. So it was sort of the running joke that I wasn't going to be able to cut it. And I was determined, and I did. I was able to lift the big ones as well. So sort of my little claim to fame.
So, I mean, all right, I want to ask how exactly your trash cans were made, but that'll lead us down a road. Did you ever think, though,
It's actually,
molding?
It's mold, extrusion, molding. You probably have some similar equipment here at New Lab.
Did you ever think at that time that you would be leading one of the largest manufacturers in the world?
No.
I mean, no.
No, I never did. I I didn't. I mean, I think I grew up in this small town. I couldn't have imagined the places I would have been in the world through GE. So I couldn't put those together. I mean, in our town we had a GE light bulb factory, so we knew GE in my town. I remember when I was at NBC and got called in to work at GE, and I told my mother I'm going to go work at GE, and she goes, "Oh, you're going to go make light bulbs? You're leaving NBC to go make light bulbs." Well, ultimately it ended up being true, but at that moment it wasn't. And so that was really kind of what you thought of GE from that town perspective.
So is Winchester like a factory town?
No, I mean it had industry. It's a pretty well-rounded town. Actually, a lot of healthcare in the town, but yeah, it has some factories.
So we already kind of got into it a little, but you did wind up starting in broadcasting, so to be the science reporter, and it was at a local station right, in Virginia. What did you learn about kind of being scrappy from being in this like small market affiliate station?
Well, I worked for a news service. It was sort of, I don't know, it was like C-SPAN for Virginia, if you can imagine how micro that would be and how compelling that must have been at the time. And so it was a news service that just covered the House of Delegates. And it was very niche.
Super niche.
It was very niche, but it was very scrappy. I mean, one day I was like reporting, the next day I was like holding a camera, and the next day I was editing. So that was my very first job doing that.
And then that was part of NBC, right?
No, that wasn't. No.
Okay,
that was. Then I worked a couple of different places. I worked for a public access television station, Wayne's World, back in the day. And then from there, I ended up at NBC. It's a perfect path. It makes perfect sense, right?
Well, I mean, nonlinear.
From trash cans to niche to Wayne's World. It all makes sense.
There's a joke in there about the media, but I think I'll just acknowledge that. And, so what was it like moving into the actual like kind of corporate environment at NBC? And at that point, was Jack Welch already?
Yeah, so I went to work at NBC just as GE had come in and acquired NBC, and it was the heyday. I worked in the news bureau in Washington, and I mean it was the heyday of media, and it was at the time having a corporate parent like a GE, the industry didn't like that, right? I mean CBS had been acquired as well, and so there was a lot of anxiety in the industry. What is corporate ownership of this kind going to do to us? I think in the end, I mean, GE's no longer, there's no longer, and NBC aren't together, but I think the people felt good that GE had invested in them in the way they did, and we got to the point where it just made more sense. The future was more for us in industrial than it was in media, and so it's a better sense with Comcast. But at the time, it was just very disruptive to think these big companies would come in and buy media.
You had worked at CBS, right?
I've worked everywhere, I feel like. But yeah, I've worked for a couple years at CBS.
Was that part, were you there during that acquisition?
That was after that.
Oh, okay. So what do you attribute then, once you were at NBC, being kind of, having been on the production side, on the talent side and the production side, moving actually up into the corporate or the executive role?
Well, my path up was communications and promotion, and that's how I sort of got to work my way through the network. And I moved from Washington to New York, and I think probably the most pivotal assignment for me at NBC was NBC News, and they basically were redoing the news division. They had a terrible issue where they had actually, it really was fake news back in the day. And the Dateline team had put a rocket on a General Motors car, and basically it was discovered that it was fake. And so it basically almost brought the news division down. And so they had to recast the news division. And so for someone like me, it was a great chance. I was at CBS, came back to NBC. It was so entrepreneurial. It was a time when you had nothing to do but sort of create a new path, rise from what had happened. And I sort of look back at that as one of those pivotal jobs where it was a great team, great entrepreneurial environment, and very pivotal for me.
Did you understand at the time, like, what the impact, I mean, were you like, oh, if I get this right, this is going to be really good for me, and if I screw it up, not?
No, I mean, I think I was planning to build my whole career in media. So I wasn't thinking, you know, then I'm going to take this and I'm going to go work at GE. I thought I'd keep working in media. But I think I did realize it was a unique opportunity to have this kind of build-up phase within an established company.
Was the goal for everybody to be in New York? I mean, at that time, the heyday of media. I mean, I feel like, right, everybody, that was the holy grail. Did you want that?
Yeah. I wanted to be in New York, yeah.
Okay.
And I worked for a brief period of time for Turner Broadcasting, CNN, and you know they were the disruptor at the time, and they were taking on New York from Atlanta. So it was sort of fun to think back at that day that the disruption to disrupt the New York way. And so I had both perspectives, having worked at Turner and having then worked in the traditional media.
So then, how long were you at NBC? Before 2003, you became NBC's first CMO in 20 years. GE's first CMO in 20 years. But through that point, working with Jack Welch, who's like this fabled, as most people probably realize, person in business. When you think about that and kind of his, I guess, turning around GE, but then maybe not so much turning around NBC. But what are the kind of key things that you think about on like working for him and how you got to the place where he was willing, somebody that's kind of, I think, skeptical of the more qualitative fields like marketing to invest in?
Yeah, well, I went there, I was leading communications and advertising when I went there, and it was an amazing time to be there. I mean, market cap was skyrocketing to the moon. He was CEO of the Century. And it was an amazing time to be there. I went there specifically because they knew they were going to have a transition in leadership. And he hadn't announced who was going to succeed him, but it was well known that there was a race on. And so he was getting ready for the transition. And so it was an important time to be there. I learned a lot from working with him. I guess a couple things come to mind. He's amazing with people, just amazing. And his ability to just stop and want to connect with people and understand. He was also really tough, and so the fact that he could do both of those things quite well, and he was really tough and demanding. And if he didn't like the way you were saying something in a meeting, he'd tell you to say it again, or that doesn't work. That's stupid. That's not going to work. So you always knew where you stood with him. That was what I liked about it. You always knew where you stood. If you were failing or not doing well, he'd come in, he'd say, you're not cutting it. And if you did well, he'd applaud you. And so I've tried to take that directness, I've tried to learn from that ability to know where you stand, I think is a really great gift you give people who you work with.
I think once you maybe told me, wasn't it like you were either a prince or a pig?
Yeah, so he had this line, he basically said, you're either a prince or a pig, never a princess. I was always a prince. And so that was it. It'd be like, you're a pig, you're a prince. And
like walking down the hallway?
No, he'd call you in, or one time when I was really a pig, he came to my office. And so I knew I was like really deep in the trough at that point, because he'd actually came to my office to tell me I was a pig. But in a way, I find it very not comforting is the wrong word, but very helpful to know where you stand. It's really a horrible place, I think, when you work with teams and people. You're constantly, did they like me? Did I mess up? Did I not? So I said, I try to take that with me. Hopefully I don't call people a pig or a prince, but I think it's good to say where you stand with people.
And better than the feedback sandwich, right? Which is like
exactly
another bane of existence. The story when you mentioned Jack about being good with people, actually, I remember once when we kind of had a similar conversation at eBay, that you think Jack was a humanist, which was the first time I'd ever heard someone describe him as such. Would you mind telling the story of how he tried to teach you to kind of be more present with people?
Yeah, well, he just really wanted people to succeed, and he just truly like the word I would think, he would be tickled. That was like a word. He'd just be tickled when people were doing well. And I remember he once called me up to his office, and he said, I need to talk to you. And I had just come out of NBC, and we were always on, we held phones with both hands, our feet if we could. I mean, we're always, everything's deadline. Without deadline, you go to black space. And so I go in, and he goes, you're too abrupt. You need to wallow in it. You need to slow down and get to know people. And I was like, what? You're Mr. Speed and Efficiency, and you're telling me to slow down and wallow in it? And I took it to heart, but clearly I didn't really take it to heart, because a couple of months later, I clearly hadn't taken his advice, and he called me and on the phone, and I was talking to him, and the phone went dead, and I called his assistant, and I was like, Jack, I lost him. She goes, oh, you didn't lose him. He hung up on you. He wanted you to know that that's what it's like talking to you, that you're abrupt. And so, it was a dose of humor, and I appreciated that he took the time to sort of school me, if you will, in a way that I've written about on LinkedIn that is very memorable to me.
Yeah. So a lot of people in media at the time, kind of rolling actually back a little bit, before GE CMO, when you were president of integrated media, a lot of people, executives, when I say people, missed kind of the changing internet landscape. And Wenda Harris Millard, who Beth actually recently introduced us to at the time, I think she was still CEO or just become CEO of Martha Stewart Omni Media. We were talking about this in the phase in media changing, and we were like, yeah, everybody, everybody missed it. She's like, except for Beth. She's like, remember, she's like, she bought iVillage, she's like, which was great. And that was, and I think a lot of people forget about iVillage. And then the other thing is Hulu, which, still, I think that the reason why Amazon and Netflix have to get into the original content game is because the distribution channel of Hulu is there for the existing networks. And I don't know that they would have, who knows when they would have gotten around to doing anything like that. So, those two things, could you talk about why? First, iVillage, which was actually what was it, like 3 years before Hulu? It was a bit earlier, yeah.
So I had been at GE a while, then shipped back to NBC to do digital, and we had a really mighty team that was really there to look at what's the future of digital. And if I can take you back 10 years ago, sort of in a time machine, that was when YouTube had just come onto the scene. And there was panic in media because, we make quality content. We don't, at the time, thinking, we don't know how to do videos with cats. What are you talking about? So there was a panic. And so we had this digital team, and that was our job to figure out, okay, what next? And one of the things we did was we acquired iVillage because we really were liking the community aspect of it. We could see that. iVillage doesn't exist anymore, which is sad. And I think, honestly, there's a whole other story to be told about just how hard it is to acquire some of these companies and bring them into a mothership, and the interdepartmental, squabbles over who owns what and all that. But we still didn't give up on, we knew iVillage was good for community, but we were still trying to build more. And so together with Fox, our team got together with Fox, and the teams incubated what became Hulu. And really it was hiring Jason Kyler out of Amazon that really made Hulu possible. So I think we knew enough to not do it ourselves, and we had had some experiences. Then we knew enough that we needed to partner, so NBC and Fox. And the best thing was we knew enough that we had to go hire a great entrepreneur to run it, because we would have totally killed it if we had done it.
But now I imagine you had to provide a lot of air cover, right? That was that when Jeff, was that Jeff or Jack? That was, okay, so then this was a little change of control, in every way. But how much kind of how much of a bubble did you have to put around Hulu to allow them to operate?
Well, for me, certainly the iVillage experience had shown us what happens when you don't have enough protection. Things get picked apart. And so that experience was fresh in our minds. And I think just setting it up as a separate joint venture. And the beauty of that model is that you can go to the parent and take only what you like and not have to take the bad stuff. And so in some ways you had to give Jason and the Hulu team the keys and say, okay, you can come in and you can go into the Fox or the NBC archives and take whatever you need, but you don't have to take the bad stuff. And it was, we had to really uphold that. And then you had to come in and, the Peter Chernin and Jeff Zucker leadership teams of those two networks had to turn to their teams and say, sorry, we're not going to give you that $10 million you want to do XYZ. It's now going to Hulu. So leaders have to officiate that and make it happen. So there's a lot that goes into creating that bubble.
And so, did you do the Hulu and know these things without a McKinsey and Company case or report, or without acquiring having an agency tell you to do it?
Yeah, we had actually, I say we give great credit to the digital strategy teams we had. A guy named George Kleevkoff, who's been a great digital strategist. on the NBC team, Mike Lang, Adam Bain of Twitter fame. I mean, we had people who had come out of those kind of backgrounds, and so they were really adept, but the team did it.
Right. So now it's kind of the modern, right, but CMO of GE. I think one of the more, I think it was like 6 years ago, the 4 I's of marketing and helping.
You did your homework.
Yeah, it's
or someone
actually,
did.
I did. Yeah, I don't work at GE. I do my own research. But sorry. But I think that's one of the most valuable things. I mean, and the reason actually why I know that is I would talk about it at eBay because it was really hard. I mean, the product and engineering organizations thought they like market this, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't work that way. And so would you talk about the 4 I's? Because I think that really changed how everybody at GE looks at marketing.
Well, I think partly the challenge was what is marketing? And it was traditionally the end of the process. We're done, let's go give it to marketing, you go launch it. And it was just such a missed opportunity. So I think our innovation, if you will, was to in our company at least, was to take marketing and say we're moving it totally up to the beginning of the process. It's about where the markets are. Let's talk about what's happening in the market, like our name's marketing. Let's be about the market. And that really put us on that path to sort of go from marketing to market innovation. And then we came out with the 4 I's as a way to just describe in the company what does marketing do. We innovate, we integrate, meaning we had to be the conveners that would pull the sales and the product and rally around the market customer insight. We instigate. That was the hardest because people, marketers traditionally don't have a long life in their companies. And partly it's because they're constantly having to come in and say, your product's ugly, no one wants to buy it. And so they're the instigators of change. And the last one was, I think, implement, if I remember.
Yeah.
And it was, thank you.
It was.
It was just because the other thing is marketers get this rap that you're just the idea people and then you walk out the door and everybody else has to do the work. So we felt it was really important to say, actually, we can be operational too.
I think that you touched on, and this is a thing you recently wrote about on LinkedIn, with the 4 I's. It talks about, you wrote about like slime and marketing and how it's like actually a series of individual organisms and components, right, to make. So taking that, and I think, that added to influence of the marketing organization in a way that I think, when people look at GE in the last few years, you guys have really sort of pivoted and shaped. I mean, you're still selling jet engines and locomotive batteries and doing all the things that you've done, but you've parsed away a lot and actually focused the narrative of what it is that GE does. And to a certain degree now, bringing the culture of innovation, and actually one thing that I do love that were ideas, the GE, like
ideas
the little ugly
scary.
ideas are scary, the little creature.
Yeah.
I mean, so much of your messaging now is about kind of letting people, I think talent by people, know that this is a place where they can come and actually do the innovative work and not just kind of keep the wheels spinning. How does one, begin to sort of pivot this giant into okay, well, actually now we're putting technology at the core of our factories to the point where we're going to have a huge software business, right, with Predix.
Well, Jeff Immelt gets a ton of credit leading the company. He came in and said, we're going to make this company, when he took over from Jack, we're going to make it more innovative and technologically focused, more global and more customer facing. And that's really been the strategy for the past 15 years. But sort of from my perspective, taking marketing as this innovation torchbearer and really asking us to be responsible for new growth. So the first thing it led to is we have to seed and incubate new opportunities, really starting businesses and all the anxiety that goes from that. And you got to match that with the trends. And so you just start watching trends. For us, a decade ago, it was clean energy, and we launched a big initiative around that. And about 6 years ago, it was understanding the digitization of industry and saying, both offensive and defensive, we've got to figure that out. And so we kind of declared a vision of the industrial internet, and the digitization of our company has just meant we've had to attract a whole new range of people. We need to have software people and manufacturing people. And increasingly, it's a new person that's right at that intersection. So, you take the trend and you say, what are we going to do about it? We have a vision. Now we got to actually make it happen. And that's what we've been doing.
That's it. You just take the trend and make it happen.
Exactly. So that's it.
Simple. We spoke 3 years, I don't know when that was, at Social Media Week on fostering self-disruption at big companies. And one of the things we talked about is you guys now I think have actually built a culture of innovation. But one of the things that we talked about, and I think was a lot of times you have to be willing, one, it's provide the air cover, but two, you have to be willing to make a big enough bet that you could wind up getting fired, right? There were 4 people on the panel. Everyone said, like, yeah, sometimes you have to do something where you're like, man, I might get fired if this doesn't go well. Ultimately, it's about allowing people to take risks, right? And not removing the kind of cover yourself mentality. And how do you, what do you think the most effective ways of getting teams to make these bold moves and actually, let the ideas come up instead of saying, okay, we're taking this trend and we're making it happen, now go and be innovative?
Yeah. Well, I'd say a lot of what we did is look to many of the people in the room here. We had to remind ourselves, 130-year-old company, you actually were once a startup. Okay, what does that mean? Can we reimagine that, and how do we learn from what startups are doing? So we spent a lot of time, tools like Lean Startup, partnering with many of the folks like you in the room, creating mechanisms to do that. And then out of that came just sort of a mindset shift in the company that starts to say, we're going to, you start to take something like a minimally viable product. Trust me, you don't want a minimally viable jet engine tonight when you go home if you're flying somewhere. But to get there are a lot of minimally viable products and steps that have to happen on the way. So some of those just key things that come out of the world you guys know, we just really drove those really hard and had to make them the way we were working. And then you had to hold people accountable for moving faster and being less bureaucratic. And that's the hardest. I remember once we were one of the startup partners we were working with, we said, yeah, it was a great meeting. You brought 17 lawyers, and we have 10 people in our company. And, so you had to sort of peel back that kind of thing, where you just had to show up smaller. You had to try things earlier, faster, get people to say, if you're going to fail, it's the old fail fast, fail small. No one wants to fail. No one likes to fail. But if you can at least give people the permission and the air cover to fail at a $50,000 project before it becomes a $5 million project, everybody works out. So it's giving them the space, the tools, and the permission.
So that sort of brings me to you as vice chair, which what I call Beth's role is reinventing the light bulb, and kind of figuring out these new models of G and actually taking over the Edison's business, right? The 130-year-old part. And what you just said sort of segues into it. And even as we were just in the United Arab Emirates together, and we looked at the sort of like public-private partnerships and also public-private, so government, corporation, and then like startup partnerships, which I think, when you look at what was accomplished there and in a lot of places now, it's allowing to move fast in this way, and it's also a kind of sharing risk and
definitely sharing risk
and eliminating risk. How, kind of your focus now and what you're doing in restructuring sort of key areas and business innovations. So one, I guess, talking about partnering both, because GE is almost like a government force. If
I don't think
my words, not yours, you wouldn't say that, I realize, but the influence more that GE has, and to get governments to move as an actor, I think has been, I continue to be actually astonished at how many places you guys are at the core of the infrastructure and
well, it's what
igniting.
we make. If you're trying to power a country that's either just starting out or has been disrupted through revolution, you need to get the power back on. Who are you going to call? Hopefully you're going to call GE. You need healthcare in your hospitals. You want to provide your citizens a good, stable health system. Who are you going to call? So those tend to be partners and customers in pretty much 100+ countries.
So with lighting now being underneath, and I know that there is an announcement today, which whatever you want to speak to that.
There's been some press. We haven't announced anything. Yeah.
Oh, been some press.
There's been some press that part of our lighting business may be for sale.
Okay, but so that and then current. So what?
So what we did, 140-year-old lighting business. The lighting industry has had lots of challenges. It's a great sort of business school case study. But the biggest technology disruption to lighting has really been two things. One, just energy efficiency, and really brought a speedy end to the incandescent light bulb because it wasn't energy efficient. And then the arrival of LED technology. And so we basically, a year ago, we split our lighting business into two. One is the consumer business that's focused on North America, and the other is something we launched called Current. And the beauty of LED is it allows you to embed sensors and controls into the light fixture. So suddenly a room like this becomes, the lighting fixtures become a mesh network, and it becomes smart. And you can manage your energy better. You can create applications for a retailer. So there's a lot of, so really we saw the opportunity to go from a lighting business with Current to an energy management, intelligent environments business that serves business. So it is a transformation happening. It's interesting because it's a scaled business on one hand. I mean, it's got $1 billion of revenue plus, and yet it's starting out in so many ways. It's got new customers, new business model, new digital infrastructure. So it's really schizophrenic, and that's, I think, part of the challenge in a big company is how do you let a small part be small until it's ready and not scale before it's time.
So when you say it's $1 billion in revenue, I mean, that's so not very much in this percentage-wise. Geez, at what point does actually something become like really interesting, be it to the board or shareholders or Jeff?
I think at $1 billion.
At $1 billion, is that the number? Okay. So I'm just curious.
I tend to like things I think things are interesting at very little millions. But, generally if something gets, you want to try to get it to 100 million, and then you got to get it to 500. I mean, I think you want that trajectory for it to be, to kind of make sense in the kind of portfolio we have.
So is there, I want to talk about GE Ventures, but first kind of the business innovation part, which we've talked about through it. I'm curious, is there a mechanism, I mean, is there like an internal pitching? I mean, if anybody at any level at GE has an idea and like, hey, I think we should do this, or can I access dollars or time, even just 10% time or something like this? What kind of things, if any?
A couple of things. I mean, at every business there's a process to do that, and then we've started to institute across the company. We've done it only a couple of times, but more of an open challenge internally. And we just kicked this off. We're a year into this, but we gave 3 people, like they pitched their ideas, and we basically gave them a year to fund their idea and give them the space and time to do it. So one's incubating inspection for, sort of like a drone for water pipes. Another one's incubating avionics technology. Another's incubating another water thing. So these folks have basically been given seed money to go from kind of to create a proof of concept, and then we've committed to potentially have GE Ventures fund it or to help connect them with other partners if it's something we don't want to do. So I think you'll see more of that. We also have a big open innovation group that's really scaled, and I think that's probably one of the more exciting things where outside the company, inside the company, there's a challenge a business unit has, they go and we sort of put it out and people can contribute ideas and be part of that.
So GE Ventures, I mean, how does one, I know a question you get a lot, so how does one access, I mean, GE Ventures? How do you find, let's accessing GE Ventures, but how do you guys find deals, right? I mean.
Well, in some ways we're kind of a traditional corporate venture group. We're set up to do software, advanced manufacturing, healthcare, and energy, and obviously we have specific filters for that. But we have investment teams that they go and, we're looking at probably with those 4 practices, maybe 5,000 companies a year that you're looking, and then we'll make investments. For us, anyone here, you can get money from probably a lot of different sources. Why would you ever come and work for a big be funded by or partner with a big company? It's because you get access to more than the money. And so we've had to set up the mechanism so we can do projects together, a commercial project. Sometimes we'll do that's non-dilutive. So it's just, we're going to fund the project with the customer. Increasingly what we're doing is incubation, and I feel that's really the next evolution. So it's become more of an incubator with an entrepreneur who's maybe on their 3rd startup and they want to come and they want to take some GE technology and hopefully be left alone and some seed money and go create a business. And we've done that in life sciences. We have a company called Vitruvian Networks, which is an immunotherapy company that we're incubating with Mayo Clinic. And it's a great founding team that, took some GE technologies, some Mayo access, some funding from each of us. Sean Parker's funded it. And so I think that's a good model. You'll see companies like ours do more of those. We've got about 6 of those now.
How active with the business innovations and the culture of that? How active, is kind of the way that you attract talent, or how active are you in that role and kind of shaping that messaging? Because it is another level of marketing.
Well, certainly the ventures team, their job on behalf of the company is a couple things. It's to see around corners, see what's next in a way that we're probably not seeing it, to bring more entrepreneurial ways into the company. And I've made it my job, just, again, taking that marketing title really, really to heart, to just be out in the external world, to just connect, to make sure we're part of these ecosystems, to make sure we're understanding where things are happening. And so Ventures plays that role. I've made it my business to try to go myself. I think there's a big believe you need to go see things for yourself. You can't just always delegate it. So, yeah, I think it's part of what our team does, but I make it my business too.
So, switching over to a little bit more you and your approach to kind of business and career. One of the things that I felt was kind of very validating and somewhat in my approach. You travel so much, almost constantly, in fact, for work. But one of the things that you've talked about is that you also make time for yourself. To go and see the things. Part of the travel is going and seeing the things yourself and not delegating. But the other part is with, probably the 200,000 miles a year that you travel, you always kind of carve out just even a couple hours, right?
Yeah, I think it's important to carve out a couple hours. Sometimes, you just get an Uber or a car and just go, let's take me to all the sites of, Seoul. I got 2 hours, let's go see it. Or just invite myself. I was in, where I saw you and Matthew in UAE, I was able to just go and kind of invited myself to the incubators and accelerators in Dubai. And just, let me see what's happening here. I want to understand how the ecosystem here is different. So I did that in China. So that is part of what I think you have to carve out time. Now that's kind of work. It's kind of just personal discovery. So that's how I try to carve out my time.
What did you find things were, very different, or what would you say they were between Dubai and China?
Well, Dubai, they both have very much engagement from the government, more so than you'd see here. Although I love, you've got now the Department of Defense teaming with NYU to launch this national security accelerator around here with NYU. So I think you're seeing more of that, but I think the government is realizing they're the capital to get it going and the glue to bring that ecosystem together. So I think that's something very different that you see. I'd say in the UAE you find people much more into manufacturing and in industry, and in China, at least what I saw, tended to be a lot of VR, AR, mobile, a lot of consumer.
I should also add, New Lab was NYC EDC was certainly very much involved and helped get this kicked off, which is I think part of this point of helping governments reduce risk and mitigate risk, because a lot of venture folks are a little bit resistant to people that make physical products, or at least they had been until.
Well, right, you guys. You know better. It's hard. It takes. It's costly. It takes time. And so I think if you're looking to get a quick return, or you want some things that you can start to talk about faster, maybe hardware isn't the first place they would start.
So I remember I kind of sought your guidance one time on something, and the output was a bit of advice that I think of often, and that is about being inspired by those that irritate us. And so that if you see somebody in a work environment, and it's wow, or it's frustrating, maybe a better word than irritating. Could you kind of talk about
Yeah,
that
well, you
perspective
make
a
it
little
sound
bit?
so elegant, and like I just naturally, when someone irritates me, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be inspired now. So I think that's I maybe packaged that because I was telling it.
You're a
to you.
marketer, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I think I remember vividly. I worked with someone who irritated me, and I remember just getting so irritated, and I stopped and I go, well, one, why is this person irritating me? But what can I learn from this person? Because they're good. And they actually are here for a reason. And so that was really for me, a moment to stop and go, rather than putting my energy into saying, like, I'm going to show him, to say, what can I learn from him that would help me get better and maybe just understand. And as I look back, it's maybe trying to place a bit of empathy there. But trust me, I get irritated, and I was irritated, and I don't sit there and go, oh, I'm so inspired. Thank you.
Okay, so it takes practice.
Yeah.
So-
Some people are just irritating. Can we just say that? Some people
yeah.
are just irritating.
Yes. Do you want my list? Can we share? So I think one big theme throughout kind of everything that we just went over a little bit with your career at 100 miles an hour in terms of the amount of time we covered is you've talked about being a fish out of water, but one thing that I always talk to people, and particularly when I ran Friends of eBay, the incubator there, it's like, look, being an entrepreneur or even growing within a company, it's about being outside of your comfort zone. And I think like the fish out of water thing, it's like, oh, there's a lot of times you're going to be pretty uncomfortable in business. Any kind of on how to cope with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you go through cycles with it. I mean, sometimes for me, it's been a couple of things. I mean, I didn't grow up in the kind of background of the people I work with. I grew up in media, so right there I was different. Marketer, not an engineer, different. Somebody who tends to look at what's next, what's new. So you tend to see things that other people think, like, you're nuts. Like, it's a cartoon. That's absurd. So that's a way to be different. So, I mean, I've just sort of built a thick skin, I guess, because when you see something, when you see an opportunity with something, you just have to go with it. You have to believe in it. You have to hang on to it. So that's been some way I've tried to help myself work through, to just go, I see it. There's something there. Don't give up on it. And then what I guess I've learned that I haven't done as well is translate it. And I've had to stop and, I mean, I grew up in communications. Words matter. You have to stop and you have to go, look at that drone. Well, why does a drone matter to me? Well, at first it's absurd. So you have to give yourself time. You have to find the right words. So I think that's probably one of the things I've learned to do, is when you're in these spaces where you're kind of the weirdo of the group, is take time to translate it. Take time to say, here's why it's relevant to you. Here's potentially a way to think about it going forward, as opposed to just saying, like, see this thing, do you get it? If you don't, you're not with it. That's tough for people to take.
So that brings up another point that you've talked a lot about, is about patience and being able to like hear no when you say about seeing something. Yeah. I mean, like over and over and over again, and just kind of like sticking with it. And I mean, I guess it's a bit of like vision or trusting your gut, or however you want to say it.
I think it's trusting your gut.
And so just keep like pecking away.
And being stubborn, right? I think there's a part of it, you just don't want to give up on something. You want to keep going. But one thing I've been thinking about lately is, I'm not sure I've always been smart about that. I think there are times when you just have to call it quits. And I'm not sure I've figured that one out yet. I think there are times when you just got to say, you know what, this is good. We're done. We're not going to do it anymore.
So when one of the things when you talk about knowing when to call it quits, there's also a moment that we spoke about when somebody kind of on the team, when you can't get kind of your team to like align and get kind of on board or executing in the way that you want. And you're like, yeah, sometimes about like the power of versus email or meetings or whatever, like you either visit somebody in person or just get on the phone, right?
Yeah.
What's going on here? And I guess that goes back to kind of the radical transparency or clear feedback that you're talking about with Jack Welch, knowing where to stand. How do you, I mean, I know you have a lot of thoughts around the topic, but to whatever degree you want to get into it, managing millennials, and this is something you and I have spoken a little bit about.
Well, do you manage millennials?
Are you asking me?
No, I'm saying does one.
I think that's TBD.
So I actually don't believe, I believe managing is over anyway. I don't think maybe it never really existed, but I think managing today is about declaring a vision, a mission, getting everyone to buy in and go forward. It's not micromanaging. It's not giving everybody a checklist. It's not saying, you can't do that until I tell you it's okay. And because it's more networked, it's a faster world. So I think that is happening because of the world, and I think millennials work well that way too. So personally, I think they're helping us go to a more distributed, a less command and control management system, and I don't think that serves people well anymore.
Right. So Six Sigma is no longer.
Six Sigma still works. Trust me, you want it on that jet engine.
Well, yes, yeah.
Right, but I think this idea of much more emergent leadership, being able to be more adaptable, agile, all those things are really where management is today.
So moving over to art and design, I kind of want to talk about your board involvements. I mean, the Cooper Hewitt, and it's a museum and it's wonderful, but I mean, Nike is an organization where design and innovation around design and materials, I mean, similar to GE in the sense of materials, but that's something that you actively seek out, right? I mean, I guess is like the antithesis to your day-to-day. Why do you go to those places?
I love design. I think design is it's the form and the function. I love the way it looks. I love the way it makes things work better. I think the ability to actually use a piece of technology and actually get what its intended purpose is because of design is remarkable. How many times do products fail because they're poorly designed or the experience is poorly designed? So I'm just a design junkie. And so I've tried to find a way to navigate that and hang out in places where I can be exposed. And Nike is a great innovation company, not just a great design company. I mean, I don't know if people appreciate how much they put into innovation, the materials, the data that they're starting to have access to. So I think I'm also able to learn a lot from that too.
So we're going to open it up to Q&A in a couple of minutes, but first I have a little type of Inside the Actors Studio questionnaire.
Okay, James.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we're the same jacket size. So, what is the biggest red flag when hiring?
The biggest red flag when hiring, well, I think hiring is really hard. I think the biggest red flag is, does somebody say I versus we?
Wow.
When they talk about the project they worked on. Once I worked with somebody, he was a senior person in the company, and he would sit in meetings and he would take little notes. He would make a little numbers, and he would go up to people afterwards and he'd be like, you only said I counted it. You said I 17 times and you said we once. I think that made such an impression on me, so it's really stuck with me.
Yikes. What are your pet peeves in direct reports?
I think
How many are here?
No. Some here, yeah. Yes. I think I just like being part of teams. One, I just love teams that like to collaborate. So I think people who can give and take, and so conversely, I think people who can't figure it out, they're kind of the victim. That's a real pet peeve.
Yeah. Is it harder to hire or fire well?
Well, I think you have to hire well so that you don't need to fire. They're both hard. But look, there's nothing worse than having to tell someone their job's over, especially when they're great and you're doing cutbacks or you don't have the right kind of costs. I mean, everyone in this room knows what that's like. So there's nothing, frankly, more emotionally hard for everybody than that. So I think that's probably the hardest because, but you have to hire well so you don't have to get in that position.
What's the biggest indicator of high potential in young professionals?
I
won't call them millennials.
Just a willingness to work really hard, to just really work hard and take on any assignment and do it with gusto and find a way to make sure that they're showing their way. I find the people who take on the assignments no one else wants, they're the ones I take a shine to. I feel like that's been some of my little formula. Take the job no one else wants, assuming you see an opportunity in it, and make it something. Because one, there's no competition, no one wanted it, and two, you have a chance to really go for it because most people aren't paying attention to it.
I mean, that's great advice for startup people too, right? Don't do the Me Too thing or
Yeah.
like the this for that. Like, yeah, do the thing nobody wants to do. What profession would you never want to do?
I would not be a good CFO.
Okay. What was your most difficult?
And they're happy that they would not want me to be a CFO.
You don't want to instigate and integrate over there.
No, I would not be
what
good.
was the most difficult management decision?
I think some of the most difficult management decisions are the ones where you see an opportunity, but there just isn't enough budget or cash or whatever, and it's heartbreaking. It's just heartbreaking when you see an idea that's just on the cusp and it's going to not happen because you've run out of money. And that happens in big companies and small. I mean, in big companies, we probably have historically wasted more money than not, or we overfund. You have enough money for 2 ideas and you give it to 5. But I think it's that somebody's so close and you just can't afford to keep going. That's sad.
I thought you meant the opposite, that like you have enough money for 5 ideas and you split it between 2, but yeah.
No, I meant you have enough
Splinter
money
it.
for 2 and you give it to 5, so nobody has anything.
That's knowing when to quit, right?
Yeah.
What was your most naive career decision?
I think every career decision has been naive. and I mean that seriously in the sense that half the time I don't know what I'm getting into. I don't know.
If you did, you probably wouldn't.
I probably wouldn't, right? I mean, probably for me going from media to GE I had no idea what I was doing, right? And I had no idea that it would open the doors that it did. But I think you have to be naive, and in some ways I'm coming to appreciate that naivete can be an asset. I have to. I'm trying to market it. I'm trying to package it.
What was your best career decision?
Coming here tonight, I think.
Wow. Who is your favorite boss and why?
I've had some great bosses. I mean, Jeff Immelt, Jack Welch. I'd say that time I worked at NBC News in the aftermath, Andy Lack was running. It was just an amazing time to be there because we had nowhere to go but up, and he rallied everybody, and we loved it. So I think that's just to me still a magical time.
If you could have worked at any company when it was founded or boom time, what company would it be?
Well, I mean, there's so many great companies out there. It is a tough one. I mean, I think any company. I'm going to give you any company. The thing I've gotten to appreciate at Nike is because it's a 30-year-old company, you still have Phil Knight, who's been the chairman until recently, and you still get that appreciation of what it took and the ability to scale. So I think any time to have been able there when somebody was founding something just as it was taking off would really be amazing. So pick one. I mean, Apple, Google, any of these right at that moment when it was just taking off, I think must have been magic.
Yeah, I mean, I think about GE deploying electricity across the country in like 5 years must have been pretty awesome. But what career advice do you wish you were given at 25?
I think I wish I had not worried so much that things weren't going to turn out. Just go with it a little bit more, not be so prescriptive and worry about everything.
Okay, so now we're going to take some questions from the audience. Some mics are coming around.
It's my mic, not
Can you turn on the house lights out there
Hello.
so we can see?
So you talked about putting marketing at the beginning of a development process, say like in a company with engineering. How does that change what happens at the interface? How does that change the skills either on the engineering side of thing or the skills on the marketing side? Going into then engineering or like interfacing with that
Yeah, it's
function?
a really good question. In many cases, I'd say some of our better marketers who've done that have come out of engineering, or they've had engineering training in some way so they can talk that language I've talked about, or they at least know how to go find and make a friend. They at least know how to go and say, give me the language. I honestly think the best thing you can do is put the engineer, the marketer with the customer, so that together you're figuring it out. Because what happens is traditionally sales would go and translate it and it lost something. Or if marketing goes and says, I've had this insight, and they bring it back to engineering, engineering still doesn't quite see it directly. So I think we've really gone to this model of marketing's role is to bring engineering and the customer together and facilitate that. What do you really, okay, I know you said you want that, but let's watch you for a while. Let's understand what you really do. So I think that's where I think marketing's value is, to translate.
Cool, thanks.
You talk so much about, the wonderful bosses that you've had and the impression that they've left upon you, and the lessons that you've carried. What legacy do you want to leave in the organization?
It's a good big question. I've also worked for some people who weren't so good, but that's a whole other discussion. And I think in some ways you learn more from the tough bosses than you do from anybody. But I think my legacy would be just somebody who's been able to take a risk on pushing for what's next, what's new, and kind of push the limits. And really, I guess at GE, I'd like to feel like I was helpful in helping to open the company up to new partners, new ways, new methods. So that's how I'd answer that.
Hey. I have a question that kind of blends like a few things that you've been talking about. So I also just got back from Asia, and the influence of the government is really interesting in Singapore and China. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on, you're talking about government involvement and things. You're also talking about how an organization moves sort of like quicker, and really what the conversation is like, how do you build an idea in the world today? And so like, how do you make it so that either an organization that might be a governmental organization, it might be a company, it might be like really, really nimble and be a startup, but how do you kind of blend this operating system? Because I think for startups, it's hard when the idea is really ambitious, but it's not plugging into bigger infrastructure plays. And so I was wondering if you could kind of like talk about where you see all of that moving.
Well, and you said it. I think it's really that word we're all using everywhere, the ecosystem. That really is, I think, the success to making ideas scale anymore. It's getting the right set of partners, not just one partner, I don't think. I think it's the right arena of partners. And increasingly, it's probably government in some of these instances. I think also it's being willing to test a lot of ideas and plant a lot of different seeds. And sometimes people don't have companies don't have the appetite, governments don't have the appetite. You start to think, oh, you're dabbling. But that's part of the opportunity too, is you have to do enough tests and enough bets to know you're onto something good.
Thank you for speaking tonight. Just a question about kind of looking at the venture fund and why venture structure versus R&D or maybe just acquisitions. Has GE seen a lot of innovation from that as opposed to it? Have they tried the other routes? Can you just talk to that?
Yeah, we actually do all three. So we have a really robust R&D institution in GE. I mean, it was actually the first R&D center. It's up in Niskayuna, New York. It's a great New York treasure, and it's around the world. So they do really important technological R&D. We have a mergers and acquisition team that goes and looks for companies to acquire. What we didn't have was this market R&D, this new model, this partnership R&D. And that's really what we've tried to create with ventures, is to make it really much more about the model, the partner development. And I think in many cases, we're all seeing it, many of you are inventing these things. It's not just the technology, it's the model that goes with it. And so if you just do the technology, you're maybe limiting yourself.
Their research campus is so amazing. There's even a hotel, like a little GE Lodge. It's like a little science wonderland in Niskayuna, yeah.
And amazing ones in Bangalore, India, and Shanghai, China. Really good.
Thanks again for coming.
Thanks for having me.
You pride yourself on getting out there, discovering new things, thinking about what's next. I'm curious to hear, what have you seen recently, perhaps within the past couple of months even, that is really on the cusp of taking off, either in the US, in this building even or abroad? Well,
I mean, I'm so impressed with what you guys are doing here. I mean, I think there's so many pockets. So let me think of, I think the thing we're all talking about, but I am trying to understand it more. I think just artificial intelligence and where it's taking us, and you're seeing it show up in more and more places. I mean, just think about the ease with which we're all starting to develop and use chatbots, the way we're embedding artificial intelligence deep into jet engine technology. So that's something that, and all the ramifications of that I'd say is top of mind for me. I wish I could tell you it's sort of a fun, frivolous one I've seen lately, but I can't, right this minute, I can't think about it.
I mean, how bullish are you on Hyperloop?
We're an investor in Hyperloop.
Oh, well, so never mind. Very. It's awesome. It's happening next week.
But I love what I think Hyperloop's going to do is it's showing that taking on big infrastructure problems from a startup perspective is a good idea. I mean, you're seeing it with space right now. You're seeing it with what you guys are doing here. So I think it's exciting when you look at it from that perspective. Personally, I don't know if I want to be in a pneumatic tube beamed across the earth. The first one, maybe I'd be the second or third. I might be first into space more than I'd be first in a pneumatic tube, though. But I know they'll get it I know they'll get it right.
At least for cargo.
Yeah, hope so.
We'll take like 2 or 3 more.
Hey, hi, Beth.
Hi.
This might be a bit of an obscure question, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts, or do you think past capital or post capital, and how GE or that influence might express itself in this rapidly unstable income inequality future that we're facing?
Yeah, do you mean from a financing perspective or just in general?
General, business, financial,
Yeah.
how we're going to operate, how someone like GE might operate or influence that outcome.
Well, there's a couple of thoughts. I hope I'm answering your question right, but a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think while we've gotten out of financing, we still have an industrial finance business, and you still need financing, especially to get some of the big infrastructure projects around the world. I mean, financing is a part of the equation when you're building a power generation or a wind farm. So financing is part of it. I'm not sure if I'm going to answer your question exactly, but where I'm going with it, what you're saying is, I think increasingly we're all starting to think through what are our obligations for new skilling. How do you come into what is the investment you need to make into a community in terms of the jobs, the skills that are happening. So I don't know if that's where you were going, but that's sort of where I went with that. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay, cool.
So I've known Justin a long time. I'm very proud of you, Justin. Good job tonight.
Like Charlie Rose,
thank
right?
you,
yeah, right. Proud of you too, Beth. Thank you for being a badass for all women.
Thank you.
Seriously. So Justin, as I've known you a long time, experiences are a big part of your life in terms of what transforms an individual. So I'd love to hear from you, Beth. What have been the most transformative experiences in your life that have really pushed you to grow and, beyond what you've talked about tonight in terms of kind of career? You can go to 1,000 events in a year and 1,000 conferences. Like, what are the things that have really changed you?
Well, I mean, being a mother, I think, has really changed me for sure. I was a mother at a very, I was a young mother. And so, just that experience for me in trying to build a career and navigate all that and sort of picking up my daughter, myself, and moving to New York was a scary thing to do, and it was hard, and so that had a big impact on me. And then I think just the connections you make with people along the way, just all these discoveries. If you're making the connection, it's worth doing it, and it makes you think about things differently. So those would be a couple of thoughts I have.
I actually know both of you from the same conference, different years, but same conference, by the way.
Okay.
The Feast, yeah. Speaking of. Yeah, this will be the last one. Okay, well, so you've been so patient. No, go for it, yeah, and then one more.
I specifically have a question. Well, thank you. I learned, always say thank you.
Thank you.
I'm specifically interested in healthcare. GE products are very prevalent in the landscape of healthcare. When you're in the hospital, you're always using a CAT scan or any other device that's built by GE. However, we found in the cases we work on, specifically electrophysiology cases, where it's a relatively new a landscape or field of study, but yet the technology somehow still feels a little old or clunky. We're getting to the point where we're asking ourselves, how can we have innovation in healthcare, which is a typically anti-momentum, regulation-fraught field? So my question to you is, with your ventures and with these initiatives that you're putting forth, how do we in the hospital, research scientists, physicians, engage the companies that we're working with every day, but also feel like we're fighting every day as well?
It's a big question. I mean, I think there is so much happening in the healthcare space. I do find more of the traditional institutions, they're all eager to partner more with startups and new technology. In fact, that's a lot of what we see in healthcare, is a lot of our partners coming and saying, help us. Can you introduce us to entrepreneurs? Can you help us vet and think through new technology? So I'm optimistic. And I think you're seeing established companies like mine and our partner, our customers, doing things earlier. For example, we've started a program with a hospital system looking at bioelectronics. I mean, it's similar to what you're just talking about. How do we start to seed that really early? So I think you're finding people in this age realizing they're being left behind. Almost every hospital system today has an innovation group that's out there helping them figure out. I mean, look at Cleveland Clinic. I don't know if you followed them, but they've been incredibly successful in investing in and incubating startup companies. So I think you'd find it, do a little research, I think you'd find that there are some of these organizations that are looking for new ideas and seeding them.
Okay, thank you. Well, I was also going to chime in and say thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thanks for
having
having
here,
me.
both of you guys. And also wanted to mention, I've also been to GRC in Esquina. It's a science wonderland there. So in terms of, I guess, just lately, we've seen a lot of activity in terms of acquisitions on the additive manufacturing side. That's the world that I operate in as well. So just wanted to get your take. What do you see in terms of what's happening in that industry? What's the most exciting for GE in terms of what y'all are spearheading on that
Yeah,
front?
additive is one of the most exciting developments in general, and I think for GE, we do a lot of additive in our businesses, especially aviation, and we've actually created an additive business because of that. We acquired a couple of printing companies, and I think the real magic is going to be for a company like ours is going to be the material science. And that's really our specialty. So getting those material properties right, especially for the kind of work you guys are doing here, really tough metals and some of those properties. So I think it's very exciting. I think it's going to change manufacturing. It's going to change industry. Think about the footprint of manufacturing. I mean, already you have a small manufacturing setup here. You can start to have much more distributed manufacturing, service models change. So all that, I think, is within the next decade that it's going to happen. Very exciting. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.